So good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see so many of you here, which just shows us how needed this afternoon is. It's very apparent that lots of us are looking for advice on what's going to happen when we go back to school, how we can stay safe, and all sorts of questions in that same vein. So I will ask our speakers to briefly introduce themselves. We have Christabel Williams and Susan Martin here from the NEU. We have Dawn Woods, who is the SLA Advisory Librarian. We have Alison Streetley. Alison is from Public Health England. Unfortunately, she's unable to share her screen, but she is certainly here and you'll hear her voice. And Caroline Roche, who's the chair of both Great School Libraries Campaign and also School Libraries Group. So Christabel and Susan, if you just want to introduce yourself briefly, that will be fab.
Shall I go first? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Sue Martin. I'm a former school librarian and I've been working as an organiser for the National Education Union for the past 5 years, and currently working on a project with NEU librarian members to bring everybody together to try and form a national network which operates on a regional basis. So thank you very much for asking me to join today.
Yeah, following on, thank you very much for inviting me to join today. I am a school librarian and I am also an NEU member and rep in my school. I'm a workplace rep for the union. I've been a school librarian for 7 years now and I've been a rep for 3 years. So hopefully I'm able to give some advice or guidance or tips today, straddling both of those roles.
Okay. And Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Caroline Roche. I am a working school librarian. I work in a school in South East London. I'm the chair of CILIP's school library groups and have been for about 4 years, I think. And I'm also chair of the Great School Libraries Group, which we, the SLA and the SLG, work on in partnership together. And I'm one of the people who worked to develop the Covid-19 advice that's up on the school library on the CILIP website, which I'll be going through later.
Lovely, thank you very much. Alison, would you just like to say a few words and introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello, I'm Alison Streetley. I'm a Senior Public Health Advisor in Public Health England, and here to run through key questions that might arise in relation to the advice Public Health England has been giving to a wide range of other government departments about the opening up process. So I have had a look at your CILIP guidance, thank you, and also as by your way, I've also been inputting to the work on reopening community libraries that's been going on in parallel. I realise that's different, but quite a few of the issues are similar. So I thought just helpful to mention that. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And Dawn, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Dawn Woods, Member Development Librarian at the SLA. Previous to that, I worked in the school library service, managing that for quite a number of years. So all my working career has been with school libraries.
Lovely, thank you. Now we are going to start very shortly with Caroline's going to run us through the guidance that has been put up on the CILIP website. But Alison, am I right in thinking you've only got a limited amount of time to be with us today?
Yeah, I can be till 2:30. So, well, so 20 minutes, maybe another 5 minutes after that. But I am actually on another call from 2, which I've delayed joining.
Right.
So I'm sort of juggling 2 things at once.
In which case, I'm thinking, if it's okay with the rest of you, there are a couple of questions that we've been sent in already that are particularly in your field of expertise. So if it's okay with the rest of you, if I asked those to Alison first and then we carry on, is that okay? Yeah, because that would make sense in case the rest of them carry on. Catherine, I'm sorry to. So the questions that we've had in that I think are particularly relevant for yourself, Alison, we had one question in that was quite simply, how safe are we going back into our workplaces to run libraries at the moment?
Okay, so I think the main thing I would want to say at the beginning is we have been through quite a extreme experience going into lockdown, and now we're coming out of it. And many people are concerned about coming out of the lockdown and into going back to work, etc. So everyone is concerned about it. I think that in terms of how safe, the main message is this is about reducing your risks, and it is not about no risks, it's about reducing and low risk. We face risks in our life every day. We cross the road is probably one of our biggest risks in life, but this is a new risk, so there's a particular concern about it. I think at the moment, the circulation of COVID-19 in the community is very low. It is circulating in care homes and in hospitals to some degree, but that's reducing. And the risk in the community since we've been in lockdown is very low. So in terms of safety, I think that there's never no risk, but the risks are low. And the main thing is to do everything we can, take a systematic approach to minimize those risks that there are. I think it's fairly clear that we're not in a no-risk situation, but as I've said, it's really a question of we live with lots of risk in our life, and it's about how we minimize them. So going back into working in a library situation, the guidance both of what the community libraries have been doing and what CILIP's done is to look at the whole pathway for both staff, for individuals, and for a pupil pathway to put in place all the structural and systems processes that we can to minimize those risks and to make sure that staff particularly are aware of what those are and have considered their own situation as well as the general situation. So I don't have a magic answer which is X%, but what I am saying is that the current approach being taken is very systematic and based as far as possible on good evidence. And if you follow the guidance and are aware of those things, I think that then the situation is that we're minimizing the risks that there are.
Okay,
I would, however, say that I would just add to that it's very clear in all the guidance that there's a process to go through, which includes doing a risk assessment and discussing the process with staff and also considering each individual member of staff's situation regarding their health. I'm sure that you'll be going through all of those points. So we wouldn't be recommending people who are in shielding go back into work. That's just a specific, but obviously all of the normal processes as outlined, doing the risk assessment, like discussing with staff and unions and all the rest is all part of the normal process.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And actually following on from that, someone else has asked, is it recommended to have actual shielding around the main library desk?
Well, this is a different word. I wouldn't use that word. I would say, are you talking about plastic?
I think that's what they're talking about. Yes.
Laminate screens. Yes. Yeah. So what we recommend is to consider the environment, but certainly that's one of the things that's being put in place. I'm sure you will have seen in shops, and obviously in high risk environments such as a taxi and in buses, which have been particularly high risk because they're very enclosed spaces. So that would be something to consider as part of your risk assessment. depending on the arrangements. But yes, that is one of the approaches that people are considering.
Lovely, thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure that we got those questions asked, because I know that your time's very limited. But if you wouldn't mind staying on, as you said, till past, that will be absolutely wonderful. But first up,
Can I just say one other thing? I think it's really helpful. People are afraid, and it's best to get those things out there. But everyone's going through this, and I think it's really important to take a structured approach to thinking about how you're going to come out, how you're going to open up your library, and a stepwise approach. Consider a pathway of what staff have to do in doing their job throughout the day, and also for pupils, and take a structured approach. I think it will be much better that you have a whole system approach and think across the whole system, rather than expecting any one thing to be a magic bullet, because it is about a systems approach to reducing risk. And I'll stop there, and I'll stay on till 5:30. Thanks very much.
No, that's lovely. That's lovely. Yeah. So Caroline, you were going to talk about the guidance. So, and I know you need to share the screen. So, would the rest of us, is it okay if we can all close our webcams just for now while Caroline's presenting? And I'll turn over to Caroline as presenter. Here we are. When I find you in this very long list of people, here we are up at the top there. There you are, Caroline.
Okay. Just a minute, I'm trying to get it to share my screen.
Okay.
I think that's sorted. Okay, try again. Okay, good. Hopefully. Can you all see?
That's right. Yep.
Excellent. Sorry, my computer's asking for extra permissions for this, that, and the other. Right. I'm hoping that all of you will have seen this guidance, which was launched on the 15th of May. We worked on it very fast. It was Nick Poole, Alison Tarrant, and I who worked on getting this out. As soon as the government announced that schools would open on the 1st of June, we rushed this. Well, it's not a rush job, but we made sure it was there ready for everybody. So if you haven't seen it, this is the website to go to, or you just go to the CILIP website and you could put in COVID-19 guidance. You don't have to be a member to see this guidance. It's free because we all worked on it together. Now, although it says it was updated on May 2020, and we did have one head questioning his librarian and saying, well, it's out of date because the government seems to send daily updates to librarians. However, we have links to the current advice. You're expected to use this in conjunction with whatever the current advice is on social distancing, on masks, which will depend on when you go back to school. For instance, I'm not going back to September, and I expect that it will be a little bit different then. So this is to be worked with the conjunction of whatever the current advice is from Public Health England. But we do keep an eye to see if anything on these pages go particularly out of date. Okay, so if you go down, you will see that we have lots of different things that you can click and find out more about, like the key principles about recommencing services. And this does emphasize that you do need to talk to your line manager and your or your head teacher, because most of our schools will have been operating already. They'll have been operating all the way since lockdown with key pupils. So the school already has a cleaning routine in place and a working routine in place for working with students who are coming in and out. So all of us coming back, or coming back in bunches, will just be an extension of that. So I know we might worry about what should be cleaned and what not should be cleaned, but don't forget the school will already have some things in place, so it's worth checking to see what they're already running for key workers, so you're not worrying about things that are happening anyway. So we talk about PPE, and again, that does depend on what's happening at the time, because at the moment they're saying that masks are not needed in schools if you work in bubbles, but of course, as we know, libraries don't work in bubbles. We work with all students, so you might need to think about whether there's a bubble system in place, whether one group at a time will come into library per day. Most people are going to be doing a click and collect service on books, and I know Dawn's going to talk about that later, so that students are not touching the books at all. So again, just click on anything here, and at the top you will find that there is a risk assessment. Okay, one for secondaries and one for primaries. So you see that we have just filled in a sample one for you, but please do use this. It's downloadable, it's in Word, so you can fill it in exactly as suits your school. But we have put these sample answers here so that you can think about what your own risk assessment is for your own school. That will also depend on your personal risk assessment as to whether you are a high-risk person, obviously not a shielded person because they won't be going back for a while, but if you are a high-risk person, or whether you are not a high-risk person. So if you're a high-risk person, like in fact I am, you might consider asking your head whether you could actually wear a mask, or whether you want shielding at your desk. Although I'm not expecting students to come right up to the desk to me as they were before, because I'm going to operate a click and collect system in my own school. I know that one of the questions that has been put beforehand, somebody was worrying about quarantining their books and saying, well, will the books run a risk if we're quarantined of 72 hours and they're sitting there in a corner? And I think the important thing to remember there is that the virus itself, it may be on the covers of the books, that's understood, that's why you're quarantining them, but it doesn't pose a risk in itself. It doesn't emit a cloud of gas or whatever. You can catch it in droplets if somebody's coughing at you, but unless you touch the books and then don't wash your hands and you touch your eyes, nose and mouth, it's not going to come into you. It's not going to be in the air emitting from the books, as it were. And I found that really helpful when I listened earlier in the month to a DEMCO were running a webinar on this, that they had a doctor on there, and he just very gently reminded everyone that the only route to infection, unless you have an open wound, was through the eyes, the nose and the mouth. And if you're washing your hands and you don't touch your eyes, you can actually touch a book that's infected and wash your hands, but don't touch your eyes, nose and mouth before you've done that. So I know there's a lot of fear around this, but unless you actually touch a virus and then transmit it into yourself via your eyes, nose and mouth, it's not actually going to get inside you. Children are far more risk at coughing at you or breathing at you than the actual books and things, so long as you quarantine them. Now, the guidance does give times of quarantining, how long you quarantine something for, and that is on books and resource circulation and browsing. So if you click on that, It will tell you how long things last here, for instance, how long it lasts, if not cleaned, obviously. If not cleaned, 5 days on door handles, 4 days on woods, 2 to 3 days on book covering. That's why we say quarantine all the books coming in for 72 hours and you're fine, then you'll be all right to touch them. Obviously, you can wash your hands after touching them, so you can return a stack of books, put them on the trolley or wherever, and then wash your hands without touching your face, and then you're okay. Okay, and if you do sell stationery, you might want to stop. I'm going to stop during this period, obviously, but 4 hours. So again, put all coins in one place. And paper, again, a few minutes. This is others looked at 5 days, but it's generally held to be about 24 hours. Okay, so we have all these different things. If you just click, they'll open up, and there's a lot of useful guidance. There's also here contingency planning for a potential second lockdown. I think that's quite important to think about, because just in case there is a second wave and we lock down again, we need to think about what will happen. What would you do? This is, for instance, many pupils rushed to take out hundreds of books from their school library. They all took them home. But what might we do differently for next time? Okay, so have a think about that when you go back. What would happen? What would you do? Okay, so I think that's all I wanted. Very happy to answer any questions about this guidance which we put together. We do have lots of links. So we have advice and guidance from the DFE. So that'll take you to whatever the latest guidance is, the sort of one that your head will be getting daily or weekly, and the NEU's advice and the HSE's advice. So you can check those for yourselves. You don't need to rely on what the head is telling you. You can check for yourself and see exactly what is considered safe for when you're deciding to go back. Okay, thank you, Bev.
That's lovely. Thanks very much, Caroline. Could you just go up to the top and stop sharing your screen for me, if possible?
Yep.
Lovely. That's perfect. And next up, I think we've got Christabel. And Christabel was going to talk about keeping in touch and remote services. So if you want to put your webcam back on, Christabel. Lovely. There you are. And Caroline,
okay,
if you just excellent, perfect.
Great. Okay, so thank you for inviting me. I just want to give a shout out to school librarians, many of whom have been dealing with difficult working conditions, furlough, illness, bereavement, and also coping with the effects of racial trauma during the coronavirus epidemic. So strength and solidarity to you all. I've been working from home from my school. I have been doing a lot of remote services as a librarian, and I feel that it's really important that we come into our roles of educator really explicitly during remote learning and take up space. Our services are going to be vital to young people during this time, and we need to be seen as vital. So, you know, to start off with, many of you have been doing this, but I'm just going to go over it. Zoom calls and team meetings have made it so flexible to meet and organise, and this is such a key tool. So I've been having regular weekly line management meetings to get in tune with what's going on. I've been making sure I've been attending department meetings. You can pick up vital information. So I am my own department, but I've also been attending English department meetings and getting the inside practical information on what's going on with the Attend, for example. It's then really important that you secure access to your school's mode of remote learning, whether that's Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, Show My Homework, maybe it's just email, but all of them are so useful for your role. Perhaps it's a combination of several, but this needs to be key for you to use, just like any other department in school. So you can use these as channels of communication to get links to students directly, such as reading lists, book recommendations, reviews, trials to ebook libraries, lessons, activities, so on. Whether you have lessons or you don't, this can be a really good channel of communication. Setting up groups and online book clubs as well. So I've actually got one of our English departments, I've got one of their 2 weekly tasks for year 7 and year 8. And I show my homework tasks weekly. So read alouds, PDFs of articles, news articles, links to accelerated reader quizzes. Can I just say, AR's ability to write your own quizzes has been brilliant, so useful during this time. These provide message functions to tune in and check in with your students, to have conversations with them about their reading. You can see what students are engaging, maybe which students need some more help, maybe accessing some services. And really importantly, other staff can see what you are doing. And you can use it to work with other year groups too. So I've been reading a book in parts every week to students. I call it book at break time. And I read a book in several parts, all using copyright allowances, which I'll come on to in a moment. I've been using Microsoft Sway for a library magazine to share links to books and free things for students to read. And actually my early use of Sway and teaching it to my line manager means our headship team school is now using it for weekly assemblies to send out. So actually librarian role can have a really big impact on the EdTech tools that are used in a school. So I'm now involved with other Sways across the school, such as our Laughter in Lockdown Sway. Online CPD, such a good area for you to get involved with. So I'm actually giving live remote CPD to support staff on how they can use Show My Homework and online learning tools too. I'm using Google Spreadsheets to record remote resources, making book lists using Padlet and Wakelet. And actually, this is a useful time to work on transition connections with your feeder primary schools as well. So I've sent out an email with a form asking what books that their year 6s have read, what's currently popular with the kids to connect with the kind of students and schools that our kids will be coming from in year 7. Regarding copyright, we really need to use the tools available to us as educators. So those having more issue with online access, such as having access to, maybe you don't have Show My Homework or Microsoft Teams, email for your students is still really useful, and we should be using copyright exceptions for education purposes as much as possible, because that is available for us to use. You can share up to 5% of a book, a chapter or a poem, up to 30% in lockdown at the moment if you check the Copyright Licensing Agency website. You can create a reader with multiple texts to share with students. You can share digital copies, so via email or on your online learning environment. So that will actually be really useful for keeping your kids reading during school closures or during a time of more remote learning. Libraries Connected have a great list of copyright relaxations for read alouds as well. And I spoke about being on the radar of management. Looking at library in the current crisis, you need to make sure you're in touch with your rep as well. In regards to the risk assessments mentioned earlier, they will be ongoing documents that are being kept undated. It's very important that you read it and you're very familiar with it. It's going to affect how you run your provision. So it's really important your provision is informed from that. Okay.
Hey, lovely. Thank you, Christabel. That was really useful. Thank you very much. We've already got a question from somebody on the chat box saying, is that 30% of any resource or book? And that's a special rule, isn't it, during the COVID crisis?
So it's 30% of a book that the school owns or that you as an educator owns as well. That's in terms of copying. That's in terms of copying the resource. So, you know, a digital, for example, a photocopy of it, you could physically distribute to students, or a digital copy of it, you could email to students. In terms of read alouds and actually performance of a copyright piece of work, though, that comes under separate copyright relaxation rules. But please check out the CLA website, Copyright Licensing Agency. It's so useful and it's very, very informative. There are textbooks on there, which you can share this tip with your teachers, actually, because I know our teachers have been really grateful for this. If you have a textbook, for example, a math textbook, you can scan the barcode of the math textbook on the website and it unlocks it for that teacher, and they can then share chapters and digitally send them to their students on there as well, to multiple students. So there's actually a lot of tools on the website too.
That's really cool. I didn't know that one. That's really cool. Thank you for that. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to go over now to Dawn Woods, who's going to talk a bit about click and collect. So, Christabel, if you wouldn't mind switching your camera off, and I'll do the same with mine.
Hi. Can I firstly apologise for the fact that school next door has chosen this moment to cut their lawn or cut their grass. So I have closed the window, but I hope you can hear me without the interference. Basically, about the click and collect is actually students choosing what to read, and you are in control. So the whole point is for you to decide what you can manage, and you may have to manage expectations of students in that you might not want to make available your whole school library to them. You might just want to make available some books, but do have that discussion. Decide what you can manage, have that discussion with SLT, and just basically either decide what you're going to go for. If you've got an online catalogue, obviously everything in the library will be on there, but you might have to point out that some will be on loan anyway, but some will be out of circulation because they are actually in quarantine. So from an online catalogue, the students choose what they'd like to read, and then you go and retrieve it from the shelves and deliver it to an agreed collection point. Now, that agreed collection point might not be the actual library. It might be the pupil reception. You might want the parents to come in. You might want to have agreed times so that there's not a queue. But just talk that through with your SLT to decide what you can manage and what you're happy with. Now, if you haven't actually got your LMS online, this is the chance to use book lists that you've produced. You can have themed book lists which fit in with their interests. There's a lot of, if you like this, you'll like this, that are available for you to look at. So you can adapt those. On the COVID guidance on the CILIP website, Helen Emery has actually done a form where if the students aren't sure what they'd like to read, they just put their interests, and the library staff choose 2 or 3 books and provide those. So yes, you may be providing more than one book loan for them, but at least they've got that choice. And also, if they haven't actually got access online, or obviously your LMS isn't online, there's still that opportunity. I mean, some of the students that can't access anything online, you might actually want to discuss with SLT if you give them priority. But actually, it's actually giving them the physical book. So then they will collect from the agreed point, they will take it out, borrow it, and then return it to an agreed point, in which case the books then go into quarantine, your end. I mean, I would advise, you know, saying 72 hours is the time. Just make sure that you don't then start discharging them until that 72 hours is up. So basically, this is your chance to actually provide book lists, to prepare reading challenges. For example, there's quite a few bingo challenges around. We've got one on the SLA website. And it's also the opportunity to liaise with teachers. So talk to them about how they're liaising with their students, and get them to help you contact students if you haven't got that facility yourself. But it's an opportunity to actually have that discussion with teachers and talk to them a bit more, perhaps. But we do know of libraries that are doing Teams book clubs. So again, they've actually decided which books they're going to use, and they're providing those as loans and loaning those. So you can actually operate click and collect whether or not your LMS is online. Okay, but any questions, please just shout.
That's great. Thanks, Dawn. That's lovely. We've already got a few people asking questions in the chat box, but they seem to be questions and answers coming up all the time. So perhaps you wouldn't mind having a look at that whilst we have our next speaker. And our next speaker being Susan. Susan is going to be talking about guidance on PPE.
Hi there, can everyone hear me? Okay, yep. The NEU has been working very closely with government officials and government departments, and in conjunction with the other main support staff unions, Unite, GMB and Unison. And we've put together a very comprehensive checklist. I'll just wave it in front of the screen. It looks something like this. There's a planning checklist for primary schools, for special schools and also secondary schools. And there's also a document which gives further guidance about the vulnerable categories that staff may find themselves in. Because it's important to say that the government has actually changed the definition of who is extremely clinically vulnerable in their most recent guidance to who should be in schools. So that's something for staff to really be aware of, because nobody wants anybody to be putting themselves at risks unnecessarily when it's not necessary. And the government advice is still to work from home wherever possible. So the wider opening of schools, as obviously you will be aware of, has been something that the National Education Union has fought really hard to ensure that those schools don't open more widely. And we're very proud that we've been able to convince those who've made the decisions that the wider school opening for primary and for secondary schools has been delayed, which is great, because we still don't know the position about how safe it is to be in school with children, what their ability is to transmit the data. And the NEU has been working, as I say, very hard with the government to try and find out the science behind the rationale for some of their decisions. So in terms of PPE, the DfE is saying that staff in schools generally don't need PPE. Their advice is that PPE is only required in special school settings or where children need intimate or personal care, where you cannot maintain the 2-metre distance. Now that's all very well, because that's very important that those people are protected, but there shouldn't be any reason why a head teacher for anybody working in school should be refusing a member of staff being able to ask to wear PPE themselves. Whilst we obviously all recognise that wearing a mask can be pretty scary for some children and actually restricts the ability to communicate with other children, older children included in that. The fact is that you need to remain safe and you need to remain confident that you are safe, and so does the management of your school, because they have a duty under law, a duty of care to ensure that you and staff and the pupils within their care are safe. Now, the checklist itself, again, I'll wave the document. So it's a sort of about 20-page document. It's a checklist which is based entirely on the DfE guidance and looks at all of the different aspects of reopening a school. Now, as speakers have already said, many schools have been open for key workers throughout the crisis, and some schools opened on the 1st of June and others have delayed opening, and potentially lots more have opened today. What's really, really important to say is that any risk assessment is date stamped. It is date stamped at that time of day and that date that risk assessment was made. And as a librarian, yes, there are risk assessment criteria that you should be involved with. You should be able to not just see the risk assessment, but you should be involved in it. And it's fair to say that the risk assessment for one librarian to the next is going to be very different, because you've got to have access, sufficient and safe access to hand washing facilities, to toilets, potentially to an in and out system, have support in the library. If classes and bubbles are going to be brought up to the library, are you going to be able to have the support of somebody there to help you go in and out of the library? How are you going to actually perform your library duties whilst you're managing crowd control? So lots of different aspects. But as I say, the checklist is something that just, if it hasn't already been done, if you don't have a rep in your school, do have a look at it, because there are key areas there. The point of it is that you should be saying yes to every single one, and those which are a no are a point forward for discussion. So, you know, kind of really meaningful discussion from that to see where the areas of safety are. So our advice from the National Education Union, obviously, if you don't feel safe, then it's up to you to bring it up. There's lots and lots of ways that I'm sure, as already been mentioned, about click and collect and remote services, etc., that you can still perform an incredibly vital role within your school as the librarian without putting yourself at risk. And if you're not part of a union, GMB, Unite, Unison, the National Education, whichever union is of your choice, now's a really good time to make sure that you have the protection of that union, because should you find yourself in a situation where your head is not using a common sense approach and saying that they feel you should be in, and that you should have the library wide open to everybody, come in and use the computers, etc., that's when you may need to call on your union for some more personal support and advice. So, yeah, please do have a look at the checklist. It's publicly available. You don't have to be a member of the union to look at it. And if you're interested in finding out more, we've got our advice line that you can call up and have a chat with somebody, and all welcome to talk to me after this webinar. So thank you very much.
So somebody's asked where they can get the checklist from. Is that just on the NEU website?
Yes, if you go to www.neu.org.uk, in fact, it's also signposted on the SLA and CILIP guidance that Caroline was sharing. Coronavirus is the headline, and you can click on that to find the checklist. And as I say, there's one for primaries, there's one for secondary schools, there's another for special schools, as you know, as that's a very different educational setting as well. And also there's a very useful document, as I say, to find out if you have any particular health issues or you live with someone with health issues, where you stand in terms of the vulnerable categories.
Lovely. Okay. Can I ask our other speakers to perhaps share your webcam again now, please, and then we can open the questions up a little bit more, because there are different questions that are coming up that you could all have different ideas on. One of the ones that I've just noticed, and they are scrolling down the screen at a rate of knots, so I will try to keep up, is I believe it was Lisa that asked. Yeah, Lisa has volunteer librarians that come in because she's got full-time role elsewhere in the school. And is there any guidance on that, or what would you suggest they put in place for that? Yep. Okay, Sue.
Interestingly, the DfE guidance actually says that for those volunteers and members coming into school, they should be offered PPE.
Okay.
Essentially, in terms of school visits, you shouldn't really be having school visits. You shouldn't really be having anybody outside coming into school unnecessarily for events, for meetings, for anything of that nature. For the time being, we should be doing what we're doing already with remote webinars and meetings, etc. And it's really, really important that the staff and the children within those bubbles stay within those bubbles and do not mix with anybody else. That's the whole point, keeping that particular group together throughout, obviously till the end of the term, the summer term, and then you know, it'll be re-looked at from September onwards. But yeah, keeping outside visitors away is the recommendation.
Excellent. And we just got a message back from Lisa to say that makes perfect sense. So thank you for that. That's wonderful. Okay, somebody's also asked about sharing the links afterwards. Yes, we will indeed be saving the chat from this session, and I can send those out afterwards. That's not a problem at all, because there are some really useful links that are appearing in the chat box. So please don't worry about having to scribble them down. We will send them out afterwards. Some questions that we had before, one that I think certainly is something that Dawn's probably going to be able to answer. We've got one that says, do you have any suggestions on how we can encourage reading over the summer holidays when we can't give access to physical books? So if any of you have got any ideas for that, that would be great if you wouldn't mind chipping in.
I mean, on the SLA website, there is a huge list, as Bev knows, of resources, free resources, and there are different things on there that perhaps some school librarians haven't used, like things like digital escape rooms. And I would just say, have a look through. You might want to just send out a couple of links at a time because it is a bit overwhelming for pupils. But have a go and just keep up, constantly contacting the students, sending them perhaps a different link every week or every couple of weeks, and encouraging them to have a go at the different things on there. So you could do a digital escape room one week. You can provide a link to the free reading sites another time, to the free books. There's lots of different things on there. So just have a go and just keep it up so that they know the library is still there. It's there to support them, and then they can contact you should they want to. But they know that that is there available to them. And if they can't concentrate on a whole book, because even adults have said they can't concentrate reading. Last night on the, I watched the Kate Greenaway great quiz on Catch Up, and the authors that were interviewed said they couldn't concentrate on writing. So it's not just going to be students that can't concentrate on books, but there are e-magazines, there are newspapers, there's lots of other reading that they can do besides books, but just so that they're involved and they know that reading is still important. The Summer Reading Challenge is going online this year. It's always been a great link for the transition, so especially for year 7s, but also, you know, that there are other things that children a bit older could probably tap into, because they may not want to think about things that they would have been otherwise thinking about. They just might want their brain to switch off for a bit. So just encourage them to use the many resources. And you know, SLA is not the only site we've got things on. There's things on the SLG site and other places as well. So have a look through and just check out some for the students.
Yeah, I could see you itching to speak then, Christabel. So we'll come to you and then to Caroline.
Yeah, Dawn, brilliant ideas and suggestions, and I completely agree. Things that I've been focusing on for over the summer, I've been making Padlets with curated lists of books from the local library service. So we have Lewisham libraries, but the way they, not to diss Lewisham libraries, they're brilliant, but the way they organise their genre books, it's not particularly user-friendly. So I create genre lists of books on Padlet to share with students. As someone said in the comments, linking to ebook platform trials as well. As I mentioned earlier, create a reader. You know, when you go to uni and you get a reader of text, create a reader of some short stories for your kids to read at home. Maybe your school's doing home visits and you can get physical copies sent out, photocopies, or sending them digital ones. Online non-fiction reading. We're running, the NEU are actually sponsoring a competition called 100 Great Black Britons, and we're using that to send out weekly non-fiction articles and snippets from books to help students take part in this competition that's leading up to Black History Month in October. The Louise Renison National Funny Award for comedy writing, that's a competition going on over the summer. I can see someone mentioned competitions, that's such a good idea. And schools will be emailing parents over the summer, so get those links in your school's newsletters. One of my sways, I did one about comics. There's so much stuff that, as you said, Bev, you can read online for free. There's lots of stuff there. So make sure you're using all channels available to just get stuff out.
Lovely. Okay, Caroline, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wondered if people had heard of Authorify. which is a good free resource, and I'll put the link in the box in a minute. But it has free talks by authors, so you can get the kids just watching an author and getting enthused about their books, perhaps. So it's just a way of having almost a free author talk in your school at this time where we can't have people in. You can go to Authorify, say, watch so and so, and they've got a lot of authors on there. Now, there is a deeper level which you can pay for, but at the basic stage where you just want to watch short videos of authors talking about their work, it is completely free. So it's a nice resource to use.
It is. It's a brilliant resource. Definitely a really good call there. Another question following on from that, from Emma, which is a very interesting one, which says, is there any news on working over summer? And is anybody making any plans for doing that? Here we go. And she's seen some articles speculating about it, but nothing official. And where do we stand on that? And is anyone, or you're just assuming that no news is good news? Is that something you could comment on, Sue? Sounds like it might be. Yeah.
Yes, the NEU have just last week put forward a 10-point plan to the government for kind of how we get out of this crisis, the way forward for education. And one of the things, obviously, that the government has been talking about is, without consulting any of the unions, or indeed, NAHT or ASC or any of the head teacher unions, not just the teachers alone, is that they bandied around this idea that the schools could be open over the summer, which is a very, it's a very noble idea. It's very, very good. However, the NEU have taken that and actually looked at it and said, well, yeah, this is a good idea. We're not against opening schools and obviously supporting our young learners. However, in order to do that, you need to invest an awful lot of money in providing, in making that provision across the summer. And one of the couple of the things they've said is, for example, we're very much supportive of the continuation of free school meals for our vulnerable children throughout the summer, which is incredibly important. But also perhaps looking at using other spaces to actually in the summer and beyond. So like public library spaces, like church halls, like that kind of thing, and maybe encouraging some of our retired teachers to come in and look at whether or not they would, be happy to kind of come and help support some of these projects. But we're talking about out of school provision, we're talking about holiday clubs, we are not talking about schools staying open indefinitely across the summer. So it's worth having a look. Again, I'll pop the link into the chat or send it to Bev afterwards to send out to everybody. But it's very new, it's very recent, it was only last week. And our biggest fear is that teachers will feel, and support staff will feel, a pressure to work over the summer holidays. And that obviously is not fair. That's not right. So we'll keep an eye on it. So watch the website for up-to-date advice and guidance around this new idea that they've got.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for that, Sue. Something somebody asked before the event was about, should we really be loaning books out, whereas in classrooms the advice is that they shouldn't be using resources and shouldn't be sharing resources within the classroom. And I think that's a really good point, because why are we any different to a classroom situation? And what do you think, personally, with the click and collect, do you think in actuality it's a workable system? And what would be the best way of doing that, do you think? Anyone? No? Yes, Caroline. Yeah.
I don't see that, personally, I don't see the problem. I know in a classroom it's because they're all touching them and passing them to each other, but with click and collect you're talking about only us touching the books.
Yeah.
Obviously we give them to pupils, so what I plan to do is to get some really cheap little paper bags you can get online and pop the books into there. I'll ask the children to wash their hands before they touch the books, and then wash their hands before they put the books back in, and then obviously they'll then be quarantined for 72 hours. So even though if they've gone to a home with COVID or the kids got COVID, the book itself is being quarantined when it comes back. So with younger kids and having classroom libraries, that, you know, washing hands and they're touching books and things is difficult. And yes, perhaps I wouldn't lend if I was in a primary, but I think in a secondary, when you can emphasize being sensible and being grown up and washing your hands to and forth, and like I said, you're the only one who touches the books, then I think that that's perfectly fine, personally.
Oh, okay, yes. Somebody else has just, Emily has just said, what about computer use? Which is an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, that would entail an awful lot of cleaning, wouldn't it? But then I suppose that would depend as well on whether your library is actually opening or whether you are just doing click and collect. I know some school libraries, as somebody else has said further up the stream, is that their library, as it's such a large space, is going to be being used for teaching because it's easier to socially distance. So, yeah, Caroline, yeah.
Well, with computers, the advice which you have got on the COVID website, on our website, is that it's, if you've got fixed computers, it's every third computer, so that you use. But I know some schools are putting antibac disinfectant by every computer, so the kid washes her hands before they touch the mouse and screen, and then washes her hands or cleans her hands afterwards, which obviously then means that the hands are clean when they're touching the keyboard and the mouse, and the hands are clean afterwards. So if my school does that, if they have enough antibac, then I'll probably put it every other computer, not every three. Yeah. But if you do it every three, you can have it on a rolling basis, so that the one that they touched is then out of commission, and you clean it in, you spray some antibac on it in between, and the next person uses the next computer along, if you see what I mean. So you've got a rolling. But as for lending them out, I don't know. You'd have to have antibac, or you'd have to have antibac spray, but you'd have to check with IT whether the computer keyboard can actually take it, and it won't, you know, it won't destroy the computer if you've got iPads or more delicate laptops. See, I've got ordinary fixed computers with keyboards, and they're quite solid. So before we went off, I was already spraying the keyboards and the mouse all the time anyway, and they can take it. But I think on some of the more delicate equipment, you just won't be able to lend it for a while unless you have a very strict hand washing policy. You see them wash your hands before they touch everything.
I can see Sue's very desperate to speak over there, so I'm just going to turn over to Sue.
A couple of points. It's recognised that schools are not opening as they did before, and this may go on from September into the new year, as horrible as that notion is. And what's really important is that your school, your workplace doesn't rush to try and get back to some kind of normal too quickly, and using the library space for a whole, or even a whole bubble use in the library to use the computers, and then having another bubble come in and then another bubble. So you may have like 4 or 5 bubbles in a day. That is impractical and that's not safe. And really important to say is that the support staff, you know, support staff librarians, you are not cleaners. You are not paid as cleaners, and you do not have the necessary training or the equipment for cleaning such equipment. And therefore there are risks involved in asking you to undertake this work, which is, you know, a speciality of other people within the school workforce. Sorry to harp on about it, but the checklist is actually goes through some of these kind of things in quite big detail. And what's really important, as I mentioned before, is that those people doing the risk assessment, the management in your school, actually come and talk to you about your library space, about how things work in practice and what you think and believe is achievable. And if it's not achievable, it shouldn't be happening. For those schools where you do have a rep hope is that the rep is, you know, already having these kind of conversations with the leadership team, and that they may have already gone through the checklist and there's a really good protocol in place for a phased, and I emphasise the word phased, reopening of your school as the public health advice and guidance allows. There shouldn't be, as I say, a rush. If you haven't got a rep in your school, we welcome anybody who would like to be one, even as a temporary situation, just to kind of help your school and your colleagues through this situation. Or just become, just be a volunteer in your school to actually be what we call a checklist monitor, that you're happy to go through that document, to speak to management, to look at the risk assessments they've got in place to see if there are any shortcomings. And in the vast majority of cases, fingers crossed, there won't be, but there will be those situations where there are issues that need to be talked about, and the NEU, Unite, GMB and Unison are there to support people on the ground in your workplace where these things are putting your children or you at risk. So sorry to be all kind of doomy and gloomy, but you know, we can kind of be a bit blinded by the amount of information and guidance out there and how quickly it changes, and to keep up with this kind of thing. But you know, really, really important, kind of start at the beginning, look at the checklist, see the kind of things it's talking about, and it can take you on a step-by-step through to decide things like this. Are computers safe to use? And it might be that the answer is yes, but it might be that things need to be put in place to make sure that that answer is a definite yes that's safe for everybody.
Excellent. Christabel, you wanted to comment.
Hi, yeah, just to add on to Sue's point there, sorry if someone's already said it, but it bears repetition. If you are in school, and even if you're not in school, your school should be sharing the risk assessment with everybody in the school. It's not something that's kept in a drawer. It's something that needs to be actively looked at by every member of staff if you're in school. So please do ask for it, ask your rep for it, ask for a copy of it, and be aware of exactly what is on it. I'd also say if you are facing issues in school, as well as letting your rep know, you can also let your district, your union district know. For example, in the NEU, I'm on the Support Staff National Council, so I'm in touch with districts around the country, well, around London actually, but I also meet up with people around the country to hear about what the issues are on the ground for support staff. If I hear from librarians, you know, you can contact me directly, you can contact your district, and we take those issues to, you know, regional and national meetings as well, so we can affect change in our union as a librarian too.
Okay, so yeah.
Sorry, I should just add to that really important point that the NEU is using the checklist to identify shortcomings to enable us to talk further with the government. So where there are issues that are cropping up in many places, we can use that as information, as statistical backup to go to the government and say, look, we've got issues in this area, etc. So it's actually not just a checklist for the sake of it. It's actually something that obviously you're using in your workplace, but that the NEU is using wider to inform the discussion. So it's really important.
Okay. Some of the other questions that are coming up. One is about whether we should be allowing the books to go home. You know, it's all very well letting kids borrow books, but some people are saying that they've been told no, they're not allowed to let them go home. The other question related to that is, what about ordering books in? Because there's one school that said that they're not allowed to order any physical resources whatsoever. Others are still ordering books from booksellers. Some are having orders come to their homes. So yeah, a couple of different questions there, but I'd be interested in what the panel's got to say about those. Anyone? Okay, maybe not. Yes, Dawn. Yeah.
I think really you've got to do what you feel comfortable with. So if you feel that you can loan out a few books, obviously perhaps not your whole library, if you can manage a few books, as long as you are operating the 72-hour policy and make sure it operates both ends, it's perfectly safe to do so. Take care of yourself, because you only do what you're comfortable with, and then make sure that you you know, get those books into the hands of the children that do need it, and then they can read at home and return, and you've got the 72-hour rule where you're only dealing with them after that time. So I think it's what you're comfortable with, obviously in conjunction with SRT, what they're happy for you to do. But I would say just restrict it to a certain number of books rather than make everything available. So yeah, go for it.
Okay. And as to with the ordering books in, naturally, the other thing we need to consider, as Emily's just said, is that lots of schools are freezing budgets anyway. So, you know, the likelihood of being able to get new books in your library is a little bit slim for lots of us at the moment, because the schools have become very, well, they've always been very tight, but, you know, it's been, they've tightened up an awful lot and budgets are being freezed all over the place. Yes, Caroline.
I would say to remember that your local public library will loan ebooks, and they're free. Very, very easy to join. You can get your students joining the local public library. What I would do is investigate that for yourself and send out details so that they can join the local library, and then you don't have to buy any ebooks. Your local library has digital newspapers, digital magazines and digital books, and they're all for free. So, you know, schools who don't already have an ebook provision, I wouldn't, you don't have to worry about that. And of course, you can just borrow them online. It doesn't matter whether the libraries are open or not, as I see questions just come in. That doesn't matter, because the ebook part of the libraries is still open. And in fact, there's been a huge increase. I think it's about 400 times the number of ebooks have been borrowed from public libraries over this period. So no, don't forget there's that resource. You don't worry about that.
And as Jackie's just said, yes, if you do have a school's library service, make sure, if you are very lucky and you do have a school's library service, yes, of course, contact them, because they're very happy to help with that. Yes, Dawn, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say that schools' library services have got ebook platforms. So, and it actually doesn't have to be your own school's library service, because it's an ebook platform. You can go to another one if yours doesn't have one. So do have a look and contact those that do have them. But if you haven't actually got your own ebook service in your own school library, you can actually set it up. There have been quite a few schools that have set it up in the past couple of months, and they have been quick to set up. Obviously, you've got to have had a budget, but then there are some free offers at the moment for actually joining the platform. And obviously getting a certain number of free books, but then you would have to invest in further. But because this may go on beyond September, it really is something to think about. So don't be put off by the fact you haven't currently got one. You can actually set one up.
And Christabel, you wanted to comment? No, you're fine. Okay. You're sitting there. Never quite sure, are you? Never quite sure. Okay, yes, that's somebody else has said the same thing, and looking at outside sources, you know, if you have got a budget freeze. Now, I'm hoping I have kept up to date with most of the questions on that chat box. There are lots of questions on there. Were there any other questions that I've missed that you want to put in the chat box now? We are recording this session, and as I say, we will be sending out the links that have appeared in the chat box, because that's just been phenomenal. There's so many great links that have appeared in that chat box. That's been really, really useful. So we will be sending those out. But if you've got any other burning questions, we have got about another 10 minutes. So if you wanted to ask them now, please do. I'm just having a look at the questions that came up before. But yes, Dawn, you wanted to say something?
I will say that for schools' library services, every school library service is different. We know that, and they offer different services. But there are many that are linked to public libraries. Therefore, they've either had to close, but in some cases, the school's library service staff are actually working. There are some that have got restricted staffing numbers because of health issues, but they have got services that they are offering. So make sure you contact your school's library service because they might be doing something, and many of them are offering different resources they've put together, and some are offering click and collect of actual project loans, which is pretty impressive at the moment. But please do contact them to find out exactly what they can offer, and try them as well.
Okay. Yes, that's really good points. Oh, Susan, you wanted to speak as well. Okay.
One of the things that NEU librarian members tell us is that they very often feel isolated in their jobs. And I think obviously this crisis has enabled everybody to get a dose of what that feels like. And librarian members tell us that they don't naturally necessarily fall into the teaching staff, and they don't also fall into the support staff role. I think what Christabel and what Dawn and Caroline have said today have given some real opportunities as to how librarians can kind of infiltrate, that kind of two very distinct groups within school, to just show how valuable and how wonderful the library is, and how they can really support learning. And obviously learning is very different to how we've been used to, and we're finding new ways and really exciting ways to how to deliver that learning. I think it's a real opportunity, where lots of the comments in the chat box have shown that there's some real intuitive stuff out there, and I just think it's a really, out of a crisis comes a bit of genius and some really good ideas. So yeah, absolutely great. Really pleased to see some of the things that are being shared. The NEU, and I'm sure the SLA as well, have got this, got networks where you can connect with people. I think sharing that good practice can keep us perhaps all going in some of our darker days, to think that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that we can really make a difference to the role of librarian within those workplaces. So well done.
Certainly. I mean, I've been extremely proud to be part of the librarian community, and yes, there are many networks, yes, including SLA, but SLG as well, the Great School Libraries campaign as well, SLN. There are so many avenues of communication, and everybody has been so supportive. But I've just been blown away with how creative people have been, and how well colleagues have coped. It's just been outstanding, the stuff that you've seen coming out. Caroline, I know you wanted to speak, and then I've got one more question, if that's okay. Okay.
I just wanted to pick on something you quickly mentioned, is SLN, the School Librarians Network. If you aren't a member of SLN, I would highly recommend that you join. It's a librarians email group. There are over 1,000 school librarians on there. You can ask any question you like about anything, and there are people who understand what you mean when you say, should I open at break or close at break or whatever. We all know exactly what you mean when you talk about your problems. There are hundreds of files on there where librarians share things freely, because we're that sort of people. So there's all sorts of templates for this and quizzes for that, and I'll put something in the chat box, or perhaps Bev will, about how to join SLN. If you're not a member, that is the best way of being connected to other librarians. And I've been over 15 years, I think I've been a member of SLN, and so will Bev. So there's some experienced librarians and there's new librarians, and everyone just asks questions.
Excellent. Yeah, okay. The question that I spotted, and I know there's other questions here, what I think might be an idea, although we are going to close the webinar in about 5 or 10 minutes, I'm very happy to leave the room open and leave the chat box open, So if you do want to chat with others in the audience at the end of the webinar, please do feel free. There's no reason why you shouldn't do that. But one question that's been asked by a couple of people is what they're finding difficult is convincing their senior leadership of the importance of doing click and collect and why that is of value. So has anyone got any tips for that, for really for advocacy with senior leadership? No? Yes?
I would probably say for the actual children that can't get access online, that is the most important thing that they can have. And that will obviously include a lot of pupil premium pupils. So I would certainly say that it's invaluable for them.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah, Christabel.
Completely agree. And it's also important to argue on a kind of educational level that actually reading and books is going to be one of the cheapest and most accessible ways for a lot of students with their learning. I mean, coming up with the fact that it's most likely to be blended learning from September onwards. People are not going to be in full time. Books are relatively cheap, accessible for students and important for their learning. So I'd be busting out a lot of facts about that. I know that the Education Endowment Fund does a lot of research around education. I know they've released a quick evidence-based thing recently about learning remotely, and they are so worth checking out their research on various issues. For example, they've got some very interesting things on there about online learning and live teaching and different versions of teaching and the effectiveness of different things. So I'm keeping an eye on them for evidence too.
Okay, and I see, Sue, you just put in the chat box about 700,000 children don't have access to the internet. That is really shocking, isn't it, when you think about it that way? And I don't think we ever fully take that on board. You know, I think it's an easy assumption to make that every child has access to a computer or to the internet, and it certainly isn't always the case, is it? And Belle's just said exactly on the same sort of point as you were making, Dawn, about the links between reading and mental health as well. And I know you were interested in saying something about that, Dawn, or you feel you?
Yeah, no, I think that well-being and mental health is going to be vitally important when children, well, at the moment, as well as when children get back to school. And I will say, have a look at the empathy lab lists. Reading Agency do a shelf help, and the SLA have got a Bounce Together offer if you want to type in the search box and look for that. But that will help with well-being and give them some books just to make them feel better and to deal with their anxiety, because that's going to be one of the ways that we can help children cope with this whole thing. Because however hard it's been for adults, it's been twice as hard, even more so for children.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the point, we were discussing this last week actually at the SLG webinar, is that it's not just going to be books that are directly relating to well-being and directly relating to mental health issues, but there's also going to be a real need, I think, for the sort of light, happy reading that we can recommend as well, you know, because I know myself, I am one of those that has been finding it very hard to read whilst we've been off. It's been, you know, normally I'm a prolific reader and I've just not been able to focus that much. However, I have read very frothy, very silly chick lit, because it's just a release, isn't it? It's an outlet. It lets you get out there and helps you to try and forget about the situation. So I think thinking on the well-being side is a very powerful argument. I agree, Dawn, and I think it's something that senior leadership are going to have to take into account, because it's just going to be such a Well, it is going to be, I think we're going to have a mental health crisis coming up, because the amount of people that have been stuck on their own at home, or, you know, that have not had contact with anybody is an unseen amount, but it's just phenomenal. Okay, so yes, I agree, Joe. Sorry, Joe's just I'm just trying to wind up, and then I'm seeing something else in the chat box. I apologise for that. Joe was just saying that she's noticed that, you know, often students, they'll reread an old favourite when they're at a time of stress, and I think that's very true as well. I mean, I tend to go back and, well, for me, it's my Harry Potters, which is no surprise to lots of you that are online here. I am very much a Potterhead. And rereading can be a really good mental health exercise. It allows the brain to switch off. I don't know if any of you have seen Nicola Morgan's information on relaxation. Yeah, you're nodding, Christabel. Yeah, and Nicola Morgan's stuff on relaxation is definitely well worth having a look at. And that will help you, give you another argument. Okay, well, we are just about at the end of the webinar officially. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to, very shortly, I'll turn off the recording. I'll ask our panelists if they've got any final remarks they want to make. The video link and all of the links will come out to you. I'm not going to promise it will be tomorrow, mainly because we've kind of got a big conference at the weekend, so life's a little bit busy at the moment, but we will get that up as soon as possible so that you can go back in and you can have a look at the webinar, and you can also check all of the links. But have any of you got anything you wanted to say in conclusion? Let's go to Sue. Here we go. We'll go to Sue first.
You won't be surprised that I'll say, obviously, make sure that you put yourself first rather than last. I think we all have a tendency to put ourselves at the very back of a very long queue to make sure that everyone else is happy and that everyone is, you know, safe. But your safety, excuse me, is paramount. And if you don't feel safe, speak up, because you can't do your job properly if you have worries and concerns. And the union is there, as all the other unions, to make sure that you get support should you need it. But yeah, doing a great job. Thank you very much for inviting me along today.
Thank you very much. And yourself, Dawn?
Yeah, I just want to say, if you have got any particular inquiries, just email info@sla.org.uk. We will talk to anybody, whether you're a member or not. We're quite happy to engage with you and answer your questions. So please do ask if there's anything that is worrying you. And we work throughout the summer, so we will be here throughout. And the SLA is putting on different challenges and different webinars throughout the summer as well, because there are librarians who work full-time job and, well, work holidays as well as school term times, so they will be working. So please do contact us if you need anything. And thank you very much, Bev, for fielding everything so well tonight.
You're welcome. And Christabel?
I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me on here, and being able to talk to people on here has been brilliant. The amount of amazing work, tips, ideas, examples, practice of what school librarians are doing is just absolutely inspiring. I think it's incredible. I think librarians have stepped up in this crisis and are showing what we can do and why we're important. So power to everyone, whatever situation you're in.
Thank you very much. And Caroline? Caro, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, I have asked permission to share this, but the SLG did a webinar this time last week, which was on returning to school after COVID, and it's got all sorts of ideas on how to run your library. Bev does one about online libraries. Lucas Maxwell does one in his usual enthusiastic and wonderful way as well. and it is available for people. You do have to pay, but it's not much. It's £20 for members, CILIP members, 25 otherwise. But if you want to buy a copy of the day, which was quite a few, it was over half a day's worth of different speakers and recordings, I will put my email address in the chat box, and you are very welcome to find that, because there's a lot of great advice about what to do when you go back and ways to engage your students in reading. Thank you. And I will be on here for chatting just for a little while, probably about 10 minutes, to help answer any questions if you like.
Okay, lovely. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And thank you for your lovely comments in the chat box. People seem to have appreciated it very much, which is wonderful. All of our speakers have been fab, in my opinion, and I'm sure lots of people agree as well. Do stay in contact with everybody after today, because, you know, we're all happy to support and be here to help. But in the meantime, I'm going to just stop the recording now. But as I say, I will leave the room open for about half an hour if you want to carry on the conversation in the chat box. Okay.